Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. Tonight's topic is Decoding the Narcissist, which also applies to the other toxic members of the Cluster B family. Chances are you've been involved with such a creature, and it's all over with. You're left in a state of confusion. There are many good reasons for this. My guess would be that if everything's all over, you're constantly thinking about various discussions, conversations you had with this creature, and how it said so many things that indicated it was a certain way, but then its behaviors ripped that idea to shreds, and you're lost, probably without a sense of closure, just hanging there while it's off with its new lover that it's advertising all over social media, mocking you. To decode these creatures has to do with language. You use language in a different manner than these creatures do. For example, you probably use your language to convey ideas, to share how you're feeling, to express your emotions, what you're going through, in order to give the other person a clear picture of what you're experiencing, assuming they have the ability to empathize. Chances are, if you were involved with one of these toxic creatures, you're going to have experienced the mirroring, which led you to believe from the start that you are with a like-minded person who is very much like yourself. After experiencing these creatures mirroring, you can sometimes picture them in a certain position and imagine what they would choose to do based on what you would choose to do, because it seems natural. They're mirroring you. It seems like almost just like you, and it's so rare that you found such a creature in this wild world we live in, that you find someone who's just right in tune with you, which is what starts this problem. If you were to take a snapshot of the beginning stages and then take a snapshot of where you're at now, it'll be the difference between night and day. So your language is used to clarify, to get the other person to understand where you're coming from, what you're going through, as you assume that they're the same way. These creatures use language in a much different manner. They don't even really know what they're saying in many cases. They actually listen to other people, whether it's on television, in a movie, or in real life. They hear certain phrases that they think sounds good, and they commit those to memory. And then when they're in a situation that would call for it, they'll pull out one of those lines and say it, just as if they're saying it naturally and that they're a regular type person, like you.
Dr. Harris. What? Dr. Harris. Well, it's possible accent. What told us? To concur.
The problem is these creatures don't understand that there's more to words than just the simple words that they're using. They use words and phrases as tools with strategy for achieving a goal. But they looked at you and decided,
I want to get you to love me.
they're going to hone in on all of your details, pretend to share your ideas. If you do something weird or strange, they'll say,
Oh no, I like that.
and they've led you down a path where you thought you were with your soulmate. The way they use language is very similar to the lesson I learned about their lies. Because I used to be involved with these creatures, I would hear the words and would find the need to be detective and investigate. Because I'd uncover one piece of corruption, I would assume, oh, there's probably more. And I would be surprised to find that some of the claims the creature made were actually true. Meaning they were verified from another source, not something planned, but something that would just be random, happens to check out when I check the other source. And I was confused, thinking, what's the strategy here? The person lied about this, but then actually told the truth about that. I was trying to figure how does it determine. Well, the answer to that is, if it gets them what they want, they'll lie. All there is to it. They use language in the same manner, deceptively, but they use it in order to control the situation, to get you, the target, to behave or react in a certain way. They do this with a persuasion maneuver, which is false, by using specific words in order to get you to do or not do something that they want or don't want. While you're sitting there telling them exactly how you feel about something, they're listening and acting as if they understand. You're thinking you're with a similar person. They're not like that when they're speaking to you. Their words are agenda-driven. True or not doesn't matter. All that matters to these creatures is that they achieve whatever it is they want to have happen. If they have to lie to get that, well then, so be it. It's often confusing because these are the same ones who swear to you,
Oh, I don't ever lie to you.
It's very confusing, which means when they made certain statements that you thought you were being romantically connected and moving things further, you thought you were really making a connection with a like-minded person, which is so rare in your experience, it's not because that's what was happening. It's because you were dealing with the deceiver who led you to believe that was happening, which makes it all the more difficult in the end when it, for example, just announces, oh, I found someone else, bye, I'm through. And you'd think to yourself, wait a second, how could anyone just do that? Because they were never really there. They were pretending to be the ideal mate for you. And they're now playing that game with another person, which would explain if you notice it doing things differently than it did with you. If that's the case, I'd check a little further and you'll probably find that whatever it's doing has to do with the new target. So if, for example, you two never went to sporting event games ever and it said it didn't like them, but then it runs off with someone else and it's showing pictures on social media, ha, we're at the game, photos, smiling with some team name on a hat, and you'll just look at it and think, who is that? It's because the new person must have a thing for games. So they adapt and put on a new suit, strip off the old one, and become whatever they think the new partner wants, which is very difficult for us to comprehend. It's very confusing if we don't learn these lessons, if we see them. You can think of it like some kind of alien from some other galaxy who realizes that human beings have a certain chemical in their brain that it needs to achieve some goal. This alien creature lands on our Earth and is on the lookout for specific people that have this particular trait. They know they can't just walk up to the potential victim and say,
Come here. I need the chemicals out of your brain. Bend over. Let me get them.
they won't do that. They would instead watch humans, mimic them, learn their habits in order to fit in so they can find one particular or several particular targets to zoom in on and then eventually get them to a point where they trust them and then strike and get that chemical, whatever it may be. These creatures are very similar. That's why they pretend to be just like you. They can't be who they really are to you or anyone. That would prevent their success because nobody would want to be with such a person if they knew what they were dealing with. And that makes sense then when you think of the extra lengths they went in certain cases where you think, wow, that's overdone. You didn't have to do all that for me. Well, actually they did, because that's all they have to do is to pretend to be someone who cares for you, thinking you're with a like-minded person who happens to be very generous and wants to help you. You're not thinking that it would be fake, usually. You're just thinking, wow, I found a nice person. Now, I have questioned these creatures when I've seen them do this stuff, when they've gone like way overboard offering to do this and that, and I've said things to them, such as, you're being fake. Why would you do all this?
Oh, because I want to. That's just who I am.
That's what they'll say, which is a lie, because you'll notice in real life, if a person was that generous just naturally, well, then you would probably see a flock of people surrounding this person, anxious for their next hit of whatever it does for them. But that strangely doesn't exist with these creatures. In fact, you'll see them act with contempt a lot of times among their peers. When you're questioning it, thinking, why did you do all that for me? We barely know each other.
Well, that's just who I am. I'm a nice person. Why? Is it so wrong? Somebody would be nice to you? You got problems.
That's one of their gaslighting tricks. When really, you're spot on. It's not normal for someone you barely know to offer to step in and do all these things for you just because you may have happened to have mentioned, oh, I need to get this taken care of.
You do? Oh, I'll do it for you.
Is what they'll say. Well, that isn't normal behavior. They want you to believe that they're just an extra generous person, but they're not. The main purpose of this information is just for you to think about if you're having trouble understanding why it did what it did and how it could do what it did. If you think about it like this alien that's landed here that needs something out of you, they're going to learn about, oh, complimenting your looks, offering to do this for you and that for you. Anything to get you to melt into a puddle within their hand so they can later get what they want out of you. And by that point, you're so far into it, you won't know what hit you, which is probably how you feel now. Well, you're not alone, and this is just not something they teach us in school. So if you've encountered such a creature and it's gone, as I always say, celebrate, you're lucky, even though it doesn't usually feel like it at first, because you're clinging on to the positive memories, thinking that if I just did this right, that would return, and no, it won't. All that was phony. It's nothing but an alien from a different galaxy who's come to take something from you that you would never give if you knew that's what it was after, and it had to trick you to get it. So if it's gone, you're lucky. One day you'll realize this. Another decode I have to share with you: if you've met a new person, or maybe even someone you've known, be on the lookout for strange situations involving friends. For example, if you meet your new partner's friend group, afterwards you may say, "Oh, so-and-so was really nice." You may hear down the line,
Oh, I shouldn't say this, but so-and-so doesn't really like you. She thinks you're strange.
something like that. Be on the lookout for anything like that, especially if you know that you were there and you didn't really do anything that would be considered strange. That's a red flag. Or there's a situation that can happen where maybe someone you knew back in the olden days, someone in your school that you see at the cafeteria every day at lunchtime, you never really became friends, you never really hung out, you just engaged in small talk, and it turns out later on that this creature is involved with this person. Usually the creature will think that you don't know them, so they are free to tell any tale they want, and if it happens to be like someone they dated, they might be telling you about, "Oh yeah, my ex was so horrible, oh yeah," especially when you told them that you had an abusive ex, they'll be saying,
Oh, mine was so awful.
and then if it turns out, for example, that it's someone you knew as an acquaintance years ago, be on the lookout for things like,
Oh, she doesn't like you.
this is one of those times where you have to use your own mind, aside from this creature, walk them out, and realize if it's just like an acquaintance, such as the one I mentioned in the cafeteria, well, that person doesn't know you well enough, nor do you know them well enough to make such an extreme opinion for or against. Be on the lookout for that kind of thing. I've had that before where it's someone I barely knew, but then I'm being told that person doesn't like you. That's a clue. The decode there is they don't want you associating with that person for some reason. And usually it's because they share some kind of history and they're afraid you're going to ask them about that. And like if you meet family members and you hear the same thing,
Oh, my sister didn't like you.
just be on the lookout. Unless, of course, you went over there and made a fool of yourself and did inappropriate things. If you didn't, and if you were your usual self, it's a clue something's fishy. A piece of counter manipulation you can use on these creatures is if, like the example of the cafeteria, someone you knew and now you're being told they don't like you, and possibly the creature will use some insecurity you may have already and bridge that into it to say, well,
She thinks that you're...
or whatever it may be, a pizza face, or you're overweight, or whatever the insecurity may be. They deliberately do it this way because it would be inappropriate for you to go up to this person and say, "Did you say that I had a pizza face, that I'm obese?" Or something like that. They know that you normally wouldn't. That's when you have to switch gears and figure, well, you're not going to ask them if they said that, but a good idea would be to verify if it doesn't make any sense to you. Go to the other person and say, "I understand you have some opinions about me," or "I understand that you've got a problem with me," or something like that that's generic, general, does not state the specifics, because that would make you look like a fool, and that's what they're expecting. Because chances are the person never said any of this. And if you do get through that barrier and the person says, "I don't know what you're talking about, really, I don't," and you believe them, if you go back to the creature and confront it and say, "That wasn't true about so-and-so, I talked to her," and then you'll be likely to be told,
Oh, she's just lying. She's two-faced.
be on the lookout for those things too. That person has no reason to lie to you about such a thing, especially if you're not even that close.
I am the all-seeing.
I am the Illuminati.
I am the coronavirus.
I am Ebola.
Would you knock it off?
Oh, give me a
That's
break.
ridiculous.
I just thought I'd keep it relevant. All those phony hoax diseases I helped to design.
Cut!
I am the Narcopath.
And I'll say it again. I am the all-seeing eye. You know what that means, don't you, honey? We may have been over with months or even years ago. But you better believe it. My all-seeing eye is all-seeing you. And the other thousands that I've duped into loving me.
I just thought you should know since I'm giving all these confessions.
Even though we haven't spoken in forever, even though I haven't made any attempt to contact you, you better believe I'm watching you. And all the others. I view you all as my property. Once you cross my path and become my partner, that's all you are, as far as I'm concerned. You're not an architect, you're not a nurse, you're not a doctor. It has nothing to do with me.
All you are is my ex. So you're my property too. I will fight if anyone I'm friends with dares associate with you. Because I'll say,
How could you associate with that person after what they've done to me? Even though it was a lie.
the truth was, he figured me out. You were just too smart and wouldn't let it go. So I just said,
Stop abusing me, that's it!
I told everybody it's over because he abused me. And they believed it.
It's reaction. 1990. Big city. Jeez, 20 years. Andy, you were so sublime. Beautiful, beautiful girl from the north. You burned my heart with a flame going torch. I had a dream that no one else could see. You gave me love for free. Candy, 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 I can't let you go. All my life, you're me, I love you so. Candy, 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 I can't let you go. Life is crazy. Candy, baby.
Well, it hurt real bad when you left. Hey, I'm glad you got out. But I miss you.
I've had a hole in my heart for so long. I've learned to fake it and just smile on. Down the street, they're all the same. I need love, not games, not games. Candy, 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 I can't let you go. All my life, you're me, I love you so. Candy, 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 I can't let you go. Life is crazy. I know, baby. Candy, baby. Candy, 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 I can't let you go. All my life, you're me, I love you so. Candy, 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 life is crazy. Candy, baby.